All right. Hello. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Today, I'm super excited that we get to talk and meet with Derek Tate. Now, I met Derek actually like last week. I think we met and hit it off. And you just have so much important information to share with people. And I think that, part of bringing you on and having this conversation is about education and providing some nurture and education and information to everybody listening because this it really is it affects our lives in a lot of different aspects. And so I'm really excited to talk to you today. We just had a little bit of a conversation before we hit record, and there's just like my mouth is just like drop open with some of the information that I heard. um, and I think it's important that other people hear this as well. So, Derek, thank you for joining us today. Would you let us know who you are and who do you serve and what do you do and yeah, introduce yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Sarah. It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me on. And I really enjoyed our conversation last week and getting to know each other. Yeah, I am a licensed life insurance broker. I am licensed in about 47 states, I believe now. So I help people across the country. And exactly what you said, there's so much information, and that's a big part of what I do is I want to educate people on what life insurance does, having it, what it looks like when they don't have it. I've seen all sorts of different sides. And so that's a big focus of what I do is I just try to lay out the information because most people they just don't realize the repercussions of not having enough coverage or not having any coverage at all. And so that's most of my business is just educating people and trying to put them in a better place to where their family just, isn't in a bad spot financially. We're all going to pass away one day. We just don't know when. It's 100% chance. So life insurance is something that, absolutely, I hate to be cliche and say I help everybody, but in essence, I do. I mean, I have clients that, are a couple weeks old. You can get a life insurance policy on a child after 2 weeks. I have clients in their 80s and all in between. So it really is something that I can serve just about anybody and everybody.
Mm. I love that. And the truth is that I think this is an underutilized piece of our financial plan, because it really is protection for ourselves, for our family. And I call life insurance an act of love, like the ultimate act of love. When we have life insurance and we are protecting ourselves, we are also protecting our family and our loved ones and those that are left to kind of pick up the pieces after we're gone, right? And I believe that it is our responsibility as well to make that transition easier for them so then they have the opportunity to fully grieve and not have to worry about like, now what do I do? I don't have the money to pay for this. So I'm really looking forward to having this conversation. We're going to dig into a couple of different pieces here that I think maybe isn't widely shared. I don't think that the information is out there. I don't see it a whole lot, and I consider myself like I dig for this kind of information. So if I'm not finding it, then I don't think that it's probably out there for the masses to see either. So I'm excited to share some of this information. Um, for those of you that don't know me, I am Sarah Jones with Keeping Up with the Joneses Financial Coaching, and I work with people that know they make good money, but they kind of find themselves on this hamster wheel of unmet financial goals, right? Like we want to get some debt paid off, we want to grow our savings, we want to be able to plan for retirement, and then life happens, and those funds that we were going to do all those other things with, right, get redirected. And really it just creates this level of frustration with our money. So I help people reduce their debt, grow their savings, again, plan for their future, and put a really solid financial plan in place. And part of that financial plan is protecting themselves with life insurance. So let's just kind of talk about, you brought it up, kind of everybody needs, maybe not everybody, maybe that's a strong word, but do you believe everybody needs life insurance, and why or why not?
Personally, I believe that you do. I mean, there's a few select people in this world that maybe they don't see the value in it because of their wealth and their assets and the fact that they're self-insured and that's absolutely okay if you're in a position to be that way. The other question though that you have to sometimes ask is people that are in that position with their wealth and their assets is how quickly are they going to be, is your family going to be able to liquidate things?
Mm,
You know, you could have real estate and all sorts of assets, but if it takes time to be able to access that money, then there's still a need for life insurance, especially if you get it in place when you're young enough and healthy enough, depending on the type of plan you put in place, it's still going to be relatively cheap. So it's to me, it makes sense for everybody. Um,
mhm,
I think, you know, unfortunately, you know, so many people go without it, and then their family struggles when they can't even, you know, take care of the burial expenses. I mean, I every day on my timeline on Facebook, almost there's somebody's passed away, and I see GoFundMe's and people making
mhm.
T-shirts, selling barbecue plates, and like that's the last thing you should have to be doing and worrying about when you just lost a loved one. Just like you said, like it's just even enough to cover the expenses of burial and all the everything that goes with that, just so your family doesn't have to worry about that side of things while they're grieving. Give them time to grieve. So yeah, I essentially think everybody needs life insurance.
Yeah. I'll share my dad was killed in a motorcycle accident almost 14 years ago now. And he did not have life insurance. He didn't have a will. He didn't nothing was written down. And I am really passionate about this. And it goes a little bit deeper. I'm not going to dig into, some of the other things that I think we need to do to prepare our, loved ones that are left here after we pass. But we weren't able to grieve. I wasn't able to even start the grieving process because immediately there are people calling wanting money. There are things that you need to do when a loved one passes that it was like the following day, my brother and my sister, we got together and we're like, how do we pay for this? How do we do it? And they weren't in a position to help out. I wouldn't say my husband and I were either, really. We had just become debt free a couple of months earlier, but life was hitting us over and over and over and over again. And then now here's this other event that happened. And it just we weren't able to grieve because we are now faced with how the heck are we going to afford these expenses? How are we going to pay for them? And you know what? They went on a credit card. And I'm not happy about that. I'm not proud to say it. I am thankful that we were able to do it, but it really pushed off our grieving. And if I'm being honest, it created some resentment, right? It created some resentment towards um my dad, created some resentment towards my siblings, that they weren't able to help and it just fell on my husband and I. And so, even a little policy, even a small amount to have helped us get through that initial piece, knowing how we were going to take care of it, even if we needed to put it on the credit card to start off with, because it does take some time. You don't just immediately get, a check written to you, right? And actually, I mean, you might be able to answer that, but even if it took a month, to receive the funds from that policy, at least I knew how it was being covered, right? We
Yeah.
didn't at the time. So I am really passionate about this subject. Um, so will you speak on that? Like how long, if you do have life insurance, does it come immediately or are there different policies that pay out at different times?
Yeah, it can take a little bit of time depending on the type of policy it is. If it's, you know, a smaller policy mainly designed for the final expenses like burial and things like that, it can be paid out pretty quickly. The beneficiary can actually even assign things over to the funeral home. Say you've got a $10,000 policy and you're already in the works of getting things set up with the funeral home, you can actually assign it over so that they'll actually just send the check over to the funeral home. And
Mm,
usually that stuff can be done pretty quickly, during as long as there's no red flags of anything that would cause any alarm with the policy. All life insurance policies have a 2-year contestability period. And so what that means is that every insurance company can contest a policy within the first 2 years. It's mainly just there for their protection to make sure that nothing snuck by the underwriting. The person didn't lie on the application and said that they were a non-smoker when actually they've been smoking for 20 years. It's just really to protect them. They're not looking for ways just to get out of paying the claim. They just want to make sure that nobody's trying to get anything past them that shouldn't have been there. And so say you've got a real large life insurance policy and you've had it for 6 months and something tragically happens and you have a heart attack. Insurance company is they're going to do their due diligence. They're going to take a little time to investigate and check, make sure everything is, the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted and that everything looks fine before they write that big check. But typically for final expense stuff, it can be done pretty quickly. And like you said earlier, it doesn't have to be big. I have a lot of clients that are in their, late 60s and 70s and they can't really afford to get a $50,000, $100,000 policy to leave behind to their family, but just having $8,000 or $10,000 to cover the bulk of those expenses means the world to their family. I mean, a beneficiary is never going to complain about the dollar amount, but they
Oh,
might, exactly like you said, have resentment if they're having to figure it out all on their own. But you get an $8,000 check to help pay for funeral expenses, and you got to come up with 2 or 3 thousand. It's a lot better than having to come up with all of it, and that's something that I educate people on all the time.
mhm.
The best insurance policy is one that you can afford, and one that you keep, and that's actually in place, at the time that something happens.
Yeah. I actually want you to say that again about the beneficiary and the amount. Can you just say that again? Because I think that right there, that's a line of gold. Like that needs to be printed and shared and posted and everywhere.
Yeah. I tell people this all the time that a beneficiary is never going to complain about the amount on that check. I
Mhm,
mean, if they do, then they're a special kind of person. But it's gonna affect them if there's no check at all. But
mhm.
having something in place, no matter what the amount, is gonna help them with the financial aspect and allow the grieving process to begin. Like we've discussed, is that's the most important thing is allowing time to figure out what the next step is. And that's what
Yeah.
finances do. They don't fix everything. They don't bring the person back, but they at least they comfort that time to be able to figure out what the next steps are in life.
Well, and that's why, I'll just mention that's why I talk so much about having your peace of mind fund. A lot of people call it an emergency fund. I hate that term, so I call it a peace of mind fund because, like you said, it might take, a little bit of time to get that insurance check cut, right? And so to bridge that gap, having that peace of mind fund built, you're protecting yourself. You're just covering the gaps, you're just bridging that, um, bridging the gap from when it needs to happen and those expenses happen to receiving that check, right? And so having that peace of mind fund is really important. um can you speak a little bit on the difference, because a lot of people say, hey, well, you know what, I've got coverage through my work, and and they think that that's quote unquote good enough. What are your thoughts on that?
I think if your job, your employment offers a group life insurance plan that you can participate in, absolutely, you should take it. It's a group plan, so most of the time you don't have to qualify for it medically, unless it's certain circumstances like sometimes cancer or things like that.
Mm,
So usually there's no underwriting. You can get sometimes a decent amount of coverage depending on what they offer. And to be honest, it's dirt cheap. Your employer is paying a big portion of it, so you can get it for super cheap. I absolutely think you should get it. But I also think that people should own private insurance because you don't control that plan. I had a gentleman not too long ago I was talking to. He had reached out for some help. He's still with the same company, but the company just decided to cut that benefit. They took away the
mm,
group life insurance, so he now doesn't have any coverage. And unfortunately, he's had some health problems in the last couple of years, and so the type of coverage that he can qualify for now is nothing compared to what he would have been able to qualify for if he would have gotten some private coverage back when he first started employment, 10 years ago. That's a big part of it is that you don't plan on hopefully working until the day you die. Eventually, you're going to leave. 95% of the time, you can't take your life insurance with you from employment. State jobs and federal jobs, there's usually a program where you can take it with you, but a lot of times it gets reduced way down the amount of
mm,
coverage. Sometimes they can go up in price as they go along. There's so many stipulations that it's just better to also have something that you control on the side that nobody can take away from you, nobody can change it, because you also don't know what's going to happen to you medically down the road. You might not be able to qualify for life insurance by the time you're ready to retire, or within a few years of being employed. So, I'll
Yeah,
tell one story real quick. I've got
yeah.
a friend in the industry, and this is something that he tells everybody about when it comes to work insurance. Is his aunt was one of the family members that when he first got licensed and started selling insurance, he went to everybody in the family, he helped a few family members. His aunt, no, I'm good. I've got this big $300,000-$400,000 policy at work. She had a great job. No, don't need this. He didn't know any better. He just kind of let that ride, and she got sick, and she ended up being on a leave from work. She really didn't get better. They eventually kind of cut her position and technically terminated her and said, hey, you know what? Your job's still here. If you ever get better and you get through this, and you're always welcome. We're happy to have you back. Well, they cut her off, and I think about 3 months later, she passed away with zero life insurance. And
Mm.
his cousin, lost the house, and it was a really bad situation because she depended on her work coverage that wasn't there in the end.
And just the ripple effect of that, right? The ripple effect of our choices, right? It might start small, but as it goes out, it really can encompass major parts of our lives that and I think that's why it's so important really to have this like forward thinking vision, right? That you're really looking ahead and you're really trying to protect yourself going forward. Because I think so much of the time we think about today, and you probably hear this a lot. I definitely do. Well, Sarah, I can't afford coverage. And I'm just going to throw this out there that I don't know that that's the case or not. And most of the time, people don't know whether they really can or not. It just falls in what you're really saying is this isn't a high enough priority for me because most people, I'm going to say most people because I work with a lot of people that don't really know where all of their dollars are going. And sometimes we can just redirect those funds right into something that is really protection for your family and protection for your income and everything else. And I always ask, if you really truly believe that, the $15, the $45, the $62 a month that you might pay for coverage, I believe that it's easier to kind of come up and add that into your monthly money plan versus trying to come up with now 8, 10, $15,000, 45,000, 200,000, whatever it is, right? Because now you've just lost income from that person that passed and again that ripple effect. And so I'm not here to talk anybody into it, and I certainly am not here to say, hey, you absolutely can't afford it, right? You can afford those premiums because everybody's situation is different. But I will suggest that maybe looking at the priority of where you have your spending, right? And life insurance really is important, and I believe needs to be up there in like the non-negotiables. These are the essentials of what we're doing with our money, right? Um,
Absolutely.
Now, I don't want to necessarily get into like the big debate on whether, term is better than whole life. There's a lot of really strong opinions on that, but um would would you share like your thoughts on that?
Yeah.
Is term quote unquote better? Is whole life quote unquote worse? Like break it down and give us the goods.
Yeah. I honestly, I think that there is a right product for each person in each situation. Um, Term serves its purpose, and whole life serves its purpose. I have a term plan that I have for the next 20 years. It's a large term policy. And, statistically, most terms, they never pay out for a few reasons. One, you outlive the coverage. So you paid into, it's a what if plan. What if something happens to me? I am perfectly happy paying in for my term policy for the next 20 years. That if something happens to me anytime soon, my wife, my kids will be okay financially for a while. That she's not going to have to freak out that she can't pay the mortgage, she's going to have to sell the car, I'll have to move in with family. Like I pay for that peace of mind. Um,
Mm.
term isn't necessarily something that you would want to get in your older years unless you have a large thing that you're just adamant about covering. If you're older in life and you're in good health and you can qualify for a term, and you're like, no, if anything happens to me, I want, my wife to have 300, $400,000, then maybe it makes sense. Um, term expires. It's a what if plan. What if something happens to me in this 10-year period, 20-year period, et cetera? Um, whole life is a permanent insurance plan. So that's why it is more expensive because it's a guarantee that it's going to be there one day, no matter what age you are. Um, I don't really get into a lot of times like, oh, term's a horrible investment. You shouldn't put your money there. Most of the time, I'm looking at it as a life insurance. It's a death benefit. Are there products that you can build cash value inside the product with a universal life or participating in whole life policies? And yeah, absolutely. There you can do all sorts of things with life insurance. But mainly what I focus on is what is the need for the death benefit? That's the most important part. Um, everybody's situation is different. You might have somebody that's younger that normally you would look at a term because they've got a mortgage, they've got young kids and a family, but what if they're taking a couple medications that they can't qualify for the term? Term's harder to qualify for. Not everybody can qualify for it. So I disagree with people saying this is better or that's better because they have no idea the next person can they even qualify for a term, can they qualify for this? Um, so it just yeah, there's no right or wrong. It's what's the situation. Let's figure out what's the best thing for that situation.
Right. I love that. And it really is part of your overall financial plan, right? Like, what's the purpose of it? What are we trying to do? I think that, just my personal opinion, I think that there are, places where we can look at like, okay, this can be a little bit of an investment, right? We could potentially be earning a little bit of money on this. But if you're looking at investments, I don't believe life insurance needs to be included in that. That's a separate product. There are a lot of other things out there that can be utilized as part of your plan when you're looking at investments, right? And I will just say I am grateful. I have a whole life policy that I put on myself when I was like 20, I don't know, 22, 23 years old. And when my kids were born, I don't know what the heck I was thinking when I was 20, but I put a life insurance policy on my son after he was born at 20 years old. I don't know why I had this inclination to do it. I'm so grateful I did. And I did it when my daughter was born, 3 years later. My son has type 1 diabetes now. It's super hard for him to qualify, right? And most plans, if he does, the premiums are they're very, very high. And as a 25-year-old kid now, it is out of his budget, right? And so I'm so grateful that he has a whole life policy that number one, it protected us when he was younger because thank goodness something happened. But listen, you said it before, like that's the only guaranteed thing is we will pass at some point. We just don't know why. Thankfully, it hasn't happened. But when he gets older and maybe he has a family or even whatever happens, that policy is there and it's
Yep.
with him forever, and
Yep.
part of his plan, I suggested to him like, hey buddy, your work has a group life and you can get it, so jump on that because here's your extra protection should something happen while you are employed. But right, so it's combining everything. It's looking at what is your financial plan, what's the purpose, and how can we take advantage of it. So I just want to say I'm so grateful I did a whole life and not a term when they were younger because it will
Yep.
carry them forever.
Yeah. Yeah, I know we talked about that last week a little bit. And yeah, it's one thing I try to always educate parents. Most of them don't even think about getting life insurance on their kid. And most people don't want to think that thought of, oh, what if, something might happens to my child. But that what happened with you guys is one of the biggest things that I talk about with parents is what if they get diagnosed with something medically down the road in
Mm.
their, early teens, early 20s, et cetera, and they can't qualify for life insurance later on in life. That child whole life policy is going to cost you, 12, 13, $18 a month. And it's going to stay that price for their entire life. I mean, my boys, they're 6 and 7. I did the same thing on them a few years ago. I
Mhm.
pay less than $40 a month. They have $50,000 each of coverage.
Mhm.
And God forbid anything ever happened and they couldn't get insurance elsewhere. they'll have at least that for the rest of their life. It also protects me that if something, God forbid, ever happened to one of them, I would have time to grieve. That
Mhm.
$50,000 of coverage would pay my mortgage and pay my bills, because there's no way I could come sit in my office and go back to work the next week if something happened to one of my kids. I couldn't
Right.
even imagine thinking about that. And those are things that most parents just don't think about. And I really try to educate and put out information about that. And it's so cheap to do it. It's just so a low barrier of entry to get it started on your kids. I just don't understand why most people don't. And you should always do it as a separate policy, probably just like you did, not as a term rider on your policy, because
Mhm.
eventually that will expire. It's attached to the parent. It's going to
Mhm.
fall off. But if you're 17 years or under, amazing time to get a whole life uh, policy for your kids.
Yeah, and I know this was a few years ago, but for all three of our whole life policies, I pay $34.10 a month. Like
Nice, nice. Yep.
$34.10. Now, they're not huge policies, but guess what? They will cover the things that need to be covered
Yep.
should something happen, right? They're not meant, I don't have them to make anybody rich, right? And with the age of my kids now, they don't they're not contributing income to my household, like you said, it's and we've got some other things in place. Could I go would I go back and make them, a little bit larger amounts? I probably would, if I had that opportunity. I'd probably make them a little bit more, but regardless, they're there and they will cover what it needs to cover, right? And I'm so grateful that I had an agent that handled my car insurance, and she wasn't talking to me like, "Hey, Sarah, this grows as investment." She really was like, "Hey, this is something that we really need to talk about." I am so grateful to her for taking the time to have that conversation with me. Because as 20 years old, honestly, I didn't have a lot of money, Derek, right? Like, I didn't have a lot of money. I am 20 years old and I just had a kid. Like, number one, I'm still a kid myself and trying to navigate this, but she took the time to have that conversation with me. So grateful she did, because um, now it's providing coverage for him forever.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that you definitely had a good agent that showed you the value of it and the importance. And I'm glad that whatever it was inside of you that told you to get it, taken care of. So glad you did that years ago. So,
Mhm. Yeah. Listen to your gut, folks. Like,
yeah.
sometimes if you got this little nudge, it really is, there's a reason for it. So, um
Think,
we might have a couple more minutes here. Let's dig in. Um I heard that there is like this, I don't know what to call it. You're going to use the right terms for me, but kind of like this cloud, maybe it's cloud based. I'm just like, what I envision is I go to the doctor, things get put into my chart and it uploads to this system that um insurance companies then have access to, and that is what they use to determine if we are insurable or not. Is that true, and can you break that down for us if it is?
yeah, absolutely. So yes, that is essentially how underwriting happens with a lot of life insurance. Is there is a company, and they house basically everybody's medical files and records, prescription histories, everything that gets noted in at your doctor. That is uploaded into the servers in the database. Nowadays, a lot of insurance companies, they don't necessarily require you to get a nurse visit for your life insurance. It means that you can skip having a nurse come out and they bring a scale and they measure your height and take your weight and draw your blood and take a urine sample. Um, that doesn't necessarily have to happen anymore. Now, depending on the type of plan, sometimes you do want to go down that route. But a lot of the stuff I do, it doesn't require that, because what I tell everybody is they're going to run your health history electronically through the system. They're going to look at the answers that we put on the application. Most of the medical questions on a life insurance application are yes and no. Have you been treated in the last 2 years for cancer, heart attack, etc.? Do you get treated for this? Yes, no, yes, no. They're going to look at that data, and then they're going to look at your prescription history and your medical reports, and That's how they're going to determine if you fit their underwriting guidelines. Every company has different guidelines. The way I always tell people is, I personally, I have over 20 different insurance companies that I'm contracted with. And if I put somebody in front of this line of 20 people and, they're taking X medication, well, 10 of those 20 might automatically bow out and say, nope, sorry, that person takes X medication. Sorry, you don't fit our underwriting guidelines. Doesn't mean you're not going to get it covered somewhere. It just means that those companies, you don't fit with their guidelines. And so, yes, there is a database that's how they determine their underwriting and what they see in the medical report. So
Mhm.
every prescription that you get prescribed, it holds weight when it comes to your life insurance, and people don't realize that. You know, um, one thing sometimes you need to be a little bit more proactive at, the doctors, if they're wanting to put you on certain medications, ask more questions. Don't just let them write you prescription after prescription for different things, because it has, consequences when it comes to this side of things, and most people would never think about it. One
Yeah.
thing I got.
I was just gonna say, it's just, I think sometimes we don't think about it, right? And that's why it's so important to share this information. Um, I'll just be honest. I was at the ER a couple months ago and they wanted to prescribe me some things. And I was like, actually, I'm not going to take those. So can you take it off? Please
Yep.
remove that. I don't want that uploaded because I'm not going to take them anyways. And they were not real happy with me. But because I had in the back of my head, like, I need to be really prepared, and be cognizant of what are the effects of this, right? And to each their own. I'm not saying take them or don't take them. Like, you need to do what you feel is right for you. But what they were prescribing me, I knew wasn't right for me. I knew I wasn't going to take them. There were other modalities, other things that I could do. But this leads me then to ask the question of, like, are there certain things that maybe we don't think would affect it, but that do, right? And so where are some areas that you're finding like people really need to be aware that these types of medications could affect your insurability? And I just want to be really clear, and I know you will say this too. We are not suggesting people that you don't take things or that you stop taking them, or you don't, if they're in your best interest, for your health, then we're not medical professionals. We're not telling you to quit taking things. This is to provide education and awareness to how it's the goes back to the ripple effect, right? Of how these might affect your insurability.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, listen to your doctors, and I just tell people to ask questions. Sometimes there's alternative different medications that sometimes that they didn't think about. That's why I bring that up. Yeah, there's a couple things that a lot of people don't realize for insurability. You know, uh, Mental health medications for anxiety, depression. There's a bunch of them that don't really cause any problems. There's a couple of them that the minute that gets prescribed to you, if you're looking for a large term policy or index universal or something like that, it's immediately out the window when you get prescribed a handful of these medications for mental health. They're just a little bit more severe, a stronger medication, but they're considered a higher class. And I've had a lot of people that we weren't able to get them the policy that they wanted because of their mental health medications. Um, Bipolar and schizophrenia, if your mental health gets labeled under that, it makes it very difficult for a lot of different coverages. So that's just one thing to be aware about, and that's why I say that about just doctors. Sometimes I've had people that they got prescribed a medication, but then they ended up not taking it. But then their history showed that they were prescribed 6 or 7 different ones because they kept jumping to try to figure things out. And a couple of those cause problems. So that's why I say ask questions, and just before the doctor just keeps writing with his pen, like have a little bit more in-depth conversation about the situation, because those things can come back to hurt you. And unfortunately, I mean, if you're a younger person and want to make sure your family's taken care of and you got kids, like, it's really heartbreaking to not be able to have the life insurance coverage that your family needs and deserves if something happened to you,
Mhm.
all because of a prescription. It happens all the time. Um, the other big one that I talk a lot about lately, and I put out a video recently about, and it's a huge hot topic, and that is injections for weight loss. Um, Very, very popular topic these days. More and more people are going down that road at health centers to get injections for weight loss. Ozempic, Mounjaro, semaglutide. They're all kind of the same thing, but a couple different names. The reason why this can be a problem is because there's a lot of insurance companies, their underwriting, they don't really take it for what it's prescribed for, and that's, you're taking it for weight loss. These are medications for diabetics. And so I have lots of clients who are diabetics and they take these medications and these injections for their diabetes. And so if you're under a certain age, like age 45, and you actually are diabetic, under the age of 45, being diabetic makes it hard to get coverage. And so if you're a 35-year-old and you get put on, you decide to go start using Ozempic for weight loss, and you want to go out and get life insurance, I've had people get declined for the coverage that they were wanting because the insurance company just straight up looks at it as, you're taking Ozempic. This is a medication that is prescribed for blood sugar control. This doesn't fit our underwriting guidelines.
Mm.
And it's happening more and more. Not saying that every company is that way, but a lot of them are. And so it's just something I've been trying to get people to be aware about. If you want to go down that road for your health journey, consider, do you have the life insurance coverage you want for your family already in place? If you don't, maybe look at that part first before you go to the health clinic and get that prescription. Just because, I had it happen. It was a 34-year-old single mother of 3 kids. She wanted, I think, like $300,000 of coverage. I thought everything was going to be great. She forgot to tell me about the weight loss injections. Came back from underwriting. I fought with them over it, tried to get them to overturn their decision. They wouldn't do it.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, I think, and you've said it several times too, and I just want to hit this point home that it really is about asking questions, right? It's about digging deep and asking your healthcare professionals, like, how does this affect all areas, right? And do they know? And maybe they don't know,
I don't.
but then get the information before you have them write. I would say before you have them, and you kind of alluded to this, let's go to my insurance provider and let's make sure that everything is in order. Let's talk to, you know, whatever professionals it is. I think this is a worthy topic to mention. Um, Go to your other professionals first and ask them, like, what could the effects of this action be? um I just had, on a completely different note, talking with a tax professional this morning and was asking her a question, and she brought up something that was kind of unrelated to my question, but I'm like, it potentially could have a lot of negative effects for us. And I thought, this is such a good reminder. I should have talked to the tax professional first before we made these other. I didn't realize the two were connected. This is the same thing, right? That just because we don't necessarily think they're super connected, that oftentimes they are. So ask those questions, and go to everybody, right? And make sure that you feel really good about your decision and you know what the effects are.
Yeah. And it's a big thing with insurance. I mean, I'm obviously in this industry, so this is what I do every day, 5, 6 days a week. But the average person, they have no idea how this stuff is all connected, and their, every medication, every health thing that happens to them. And so that's what the biggest thing is, like I said in the beginning, is just trying to educate people of how this process works. Sometimes I get people on my calendar and I call them up for their appointment and they're like, well, how much is it? Just tell me the price. And I'm like, well, hang on just a second. There's a little bit of a process, and I try to tell people, like, think about it just like any other insurance, your car insurance. You call up to get a quote for your car insurance, they're going to want to know the VIN number. They're going to, want to see what your driving record looks like, what color is the car, what year is it? Is it a Lamborghini or is it a Ford, Taurus? Like, it matters. I mean, life insurance, they're insuring your life, so they want to make sure that they're making a good investment, and that what your health is. Doesn't mean you can't get approved for things. It just means that your life insurance might cost more than somebody else, if they're in better health or a younger age. And another thing I tell people all the time is, you're never going to be younger or healthier, most likely, than you are today. The longer you put off looking at coverage, you never know what can happen. Yeah, another one I had just literally 2 weeks ago. I was talking to a husband and wife about coverage for him. He had a few things going on health wise with him. We talked on Friday. Um, we were scheduled to actually. I normally don't work on weekends, but I was going to make an exception because they were busy. We were going to get back together on Saturday. I called them a little bit later than I was expecting to call them on Saturday. She said, "You know what, Derek? I know you don't normally do this on Saturdays. Let's just talk Monday morning. We'll get this all figured out. We'll get the policy in place for him." I went to call her Monday morning, and she goes, Derek, I'm sorry, but it's not needed anymore. He passed away
Oh,
that morning,
oh,
and that partly my fault for letting letting her go on Saturday when I could tell she was in the middle of something and busy, and I let it go and said, okay, yeah, you know what, it's fine, like that's fine. I'll call you first thing Monday morning. We'll do it then. And he passed away Monday morning.
mm,
Now, granted, like it probably wouldn't have made a difference at that point because the policy wouldn't have even been issued and enforced at that time, because it
mm-hmm.
takes a couple days. But it's still like things can change in an instant. Um, and that's the biggest thing is just take a look at your situation and your family and ask yourself, if I didn't wake up tomorrow, what does that look like for my loved ones around me? you know and again, it doesn't have to cost a lot of money. It doesn't have to be a bunch of coverage. It can be as little as 5, 10, 15, 20,000 of it, just a little whole life policy that's going to be there to take care of the expenses of your funeral, and all the extra little things that they're going to have to deal with, with your passing.
Yeah, I cannot stress this enough that even through, my own situation, and now granted, I didn't rely on my dad's income, like our finances weren't combined, but it didn't mean still that we were like, how the heck are we going to make this happen, right? Thankfully, he had some really great friends, right? And they put on a benefit um for us kids afterwards, and ultimately, they raised money, and the friends and family, raised money and gave us money to help cover it. So grateful.
Yeah.
So incredibly grateful. But I know the feelings of all of that, and I know how grateful I was to them because it it didn't make anything better, but it allowed me to pay my credit card off, right? Because I had put all of those expenses on the credit card, and before that, I didn't know how I was gonna it was gonna run up. I was gonna have interest, and it added to the already stressful and awful situation that was going on, right? And now with the invention, I don't think GoFundMe was a thing then. Maybe it was, but I don't remember, it really being a thing at that point. So, and I think that people oftentimes want to give and they want to help, but we don't need to rely on that, right?
Mm.
Because everybody's situation changes, and grateful to have people give, 5, 10, 15, $20 to help out. Like that's great. But it's us taking this into our own hands and protecting our families,
Yeah.
right? And I've said again, it didn't need to be a big policy. If my dad had $5,000, right? If he had a $5,000 policy, how extremely grateful we would have been, knowing that, like, okay, I can breathe like a little bit easier, right? And I don't have to worry about that piece of it. I can actually mourn the loss that just occurred, right? And I could start to process everything that happened without the money being a piece of that, right? And Derek, is there anything that you'd like to, I mean, we covered a lot. I want to be respectful of your time and everybody's time. Has been so informative. Is there anything that you want to kind of close with? Is there anything that you really want to say that you want people to be aware of that we didn't cover?
No, no, I feel like we did a pretty good job of hitting most points of work coverage, your health history, and medications and everything that comes into play that people just need to be aware about. And then ultimately, it's just like you said. I mean, it's amazing that people do come up and step up to help people in a time of need, and you know, lots of people are extremely blessed in those situations. But it just goes back to, yes, taking the time to take responsibility for what you want to leave behind, the legacy. And a lot of people just don't reflect on that. They think that I'm in good health, nothing's going to happen. and they just don't make it a priority. And I know a lot of people in the business world that are entrepreneurs, and they have very good companies and successful companies, and have the wall full of Jordans and the watches on their wrists. And I personally know people that don't have life insurance, and they're, especially business owners. If you're a one-man show and you're the head of that business and an entrepreneur, and something happens to you tomorrow, your stay-at-home wife and kids, what does it look like when your income and your business crumbles because you're not there anymore? It's just something to really take a look at your situation and make sure that, what if something happens tomorrow? I mean, eventually we're all going to go. I mean, I hope it's not for 20, 30, 40 years, et cetera, for people, but it could be tomorrow. And if that financially would be a tragedy on your family, then take a look at it, and reach out to me, reach out to somebody I don't care, just get covered, get it figured out.
Yeah. And I'm just gonna say, the wall full of Jordans and those fancy watches, your family are not gonna wanna have to list those on eBay right away to help cover the expenses, right? Like, that shouldn't be their job to that shouldn't be something that they should have to do, right?
Yep.
Um, so while you might have those things and they might be great and they might be worth some might have value, they might be considered an asset, your family shouldn't have to list them right away to help cover your final expenses.
Make it
So,
easy on them during that
mm,
process. It's going to be hard enough, you know,
yeah.
losing somebody you love. That's hard enough as it is. Take away the financial pains.
Mhm.
It's really simple.
And this process isn't hard either, right? To get coverage, it's not hard. So
No,
it's, it's not pulling a tooth, it's not, cutting an arm off. Like, this is relatively easy, folks. And
yeah,
so,
smart
this little bit
conversation.
of time, right, right. It's we waste more time, like on the phone scrolling, than we would having a conversation and getting the plan started. So getting the process started. So Derek, I'm going to put all of your information in the notes here. So if anybody wants to get in contact with you, please, guys, I highly recommend it. You're not going to go wrong with reaching out and having a conversation with Derek. So all of his contact information is going to be in the caption and the notes. Uh, thank you again, Derek, for having this conversation. Tons of value added and tons of information shared here. So thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate you having me on and getting to chat.
Until next time.